Please protect me. Little girl begged a biker in a diner. What Hell's Angels did shocked all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to our main character. Please protect me from him. Those 5 trembling words were enough to silence an entire diner on a rainy Thursday morning. Outside, cold spring rain tapped against the windows of Maggie's roadside diner just off Highway 41 in rural Missouri. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee, bacon, and warm biscuits filled the air while truckers, farmers, and early commuters went about their routines. Nobody expected anything unusual to happen. Nobody expected a little girl to walk through the front door alone. Ethan Reaper Callahan sat in his usual booth near the back wall, a steaming mug of black coffee resting beside his plate. At 52 years old, Ethan had the kind of face that made strangers think twice before speaking to him. Years spent on the road had left weathered lines across his skin. Silver streaks ran through his beard. Tattoos disappeared beneath the sleeves of his denim shirt, and the leather vest hanging beside him carried the unmistakable patch of the Hell's Angels. Most people left him alone. Ethan preferred it that way. He watched the rain slide down the glass while quietly eating breakfast, enjoying the rare peace that came with an empty morning. Then the bell above the diner door chimed. Every head turned. A small girl stepped inside. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her blonde hair was damp from the rain, strands sticking to her cheeks. A faded pink jacket hung loosely around her shoulders, and her sneakers were soaked from walking through puddles. She looked around the room with wide blue eyes that seemed far too worried for a child her age. The waitress nearest the counter smiled kindly and opened her mouth to greet her, but before she could speak, the girl continued walking. Past the counter, past the booths, past every friendly face. In the room, she moved directly toward the most intimidating man in the diner. Ethan looked up as the small figure stopped beside his booth. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The girl's lower lip trembled. Her small fingers clutched the edge of his vest hanging beside the seat. Then she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "Please protect me from him." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He lowered his coffee mug slowly. The diner had gone completely silent. The girl glanced nervously toward the entrance. Ethan followed her gaze. Through the rain-streaked glass, a dark SUV had just pulled into the parking lot. Its headlights reflected across the wet pavement. The girl instinctively stepped closer to Ethan's booth. Not hiding, seeking shelter. That single movement told him everything he needed to know. Ethan shifted slightly and noticed faint marks on the child's wrist where she held onto her sleeve. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just enough to suggest fear had been living in her world for far too long. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ethan asked gently. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Harper." Ethan nodded. "Okay, Lily, take a seat." She hesitated. "He'll be mad if he sees me." "Then let him be mad," Ethan replied calmly. Something in his voice seemed to ease her fear. Lily slid into the booth across from him. The waitress immediately brought a cup of hot chocolate without being asked. Several customers exchanged worried looks. Nobody spoke. Outside, the SUV door opened. A tall man stepped out holding a black umbrella. He looked respectable enough. Clean clothes, neatly combed hair. The kind of man nobody would notice in a crowd. Yet the moment Lily saw him, her entire body stiffened. Ethan noticed. Years of reading people had taught him to recognize fear. Real fear. The kind that couldn't be faked. The diner door opened. The bell chimed again. Rain swirled in behind the newcomer as he stepped inside and scanned the room. His eyes landed on Lily almost instantly. Then they shifted toward Ethan. For several long seconds, neither man moved. Ethan calmly reached for his coffee while the stranger offered a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. And in that moment, Ethan realized something deeply unsettling. He recognized the man, not from the town, not from the highway, but from a photograph he had seen months earlier. during a search that the Hells Angels chapter had never managed to finish. A search connected to a missing elderly woman who had vanished without a trace 7 months ago. Lily could not take her eyes off the man standing near the entrance. The moment he stepped inside, the warmth of the diner seemed to disappear. He removed his umbrella, smiled politely at a few customers, and looked exactly like the kind of person nobody would ever suspect of causing trouble. Yet across from Ethan, Lily lowered her head and wrapped both hands around the cup of hot chocolate, as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Ethan watched her carefully. Fear told the truth long before words ever could. The man began walking toward their booth. "There you are, sweetheart," he said with an easy laugh. "I have been looking everywhere for you." Lily did not answer. The silence stretched. "You gave me quite a scare," the man continued. "I am Derek Vaughn. Lily is my stepdaughter." He extended a hand toward Ethan. "Sorry for the inconvenience." Ethan glanced at the offered hand, but did not take it. "Seems like she wanted some space." Derek chuckled softly. "Kids get emotional sometimes." He looked at Lily. "Come on, kiddo. Let's head home." Lily's fingers tightened around the mug. Ethan noticed her knuckles turning pale. "I think she is still drinking her cocoa," Ethan said calmly. Derek's smile faded for a fraction of a second before returning. "Of course." He slid into a nearby booth and waited. Ethan could feel the entire diner watching. Nobody wanted conflict. Nobody wanted trouble. But nobody looked comfortable either. A few minutes passed. Lily finally whispered, "He's going to be angry later." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Why do you think that?" Her eyes remained fixed on the table. "Because he always gets angry when people ask questions." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Before he could respond, something caught his attention. A small silver bracelet peeked out beneath the sleeve of Lily's jacket. It looked old, worn smooth by years of use. The clasp was damaged, and one of the tiny charms had broken off. "That is a nice bracelet," Ethan said gently. For the first time since entering the diner, Lily's expression softened. She touched it carefully. "My grandma gave it to me." Ethan looked closer. A memory stirred somewhere deep. In his mind. "Can I see it?" Lily hesitated, then slowly extended her wrist. Ethan turned the bracelet over. Tiny engraved letters covered the back. "To Lily. Love, Grandma Martha." The moment he read the name, his stomach dropped. Martha Harper. He knew that name. Not personally, but well enough. 7 months earlier, flyers with her photograph had appeared throughout 3 counties. Martha Harper, 71 years old. Missing. Last seen leaving her home one quiet afternoon. No signs of a struggle. No explanation. No answers. Ethan remembered because several members of his chapter had volunteered to help search rural backroads after local volunteers came up empty. They never found a trace. He looked up slowly. Derek was watching from across the room. Their eyes met for only a second, but something passed between them. Recognition, caution, maybe even concern. Ethan looked back at Lily. "When did you last see your grandmother?" he asked softly. Lily swallowed. Her voice became barely audible. "The day before she disappeared." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "Did she ever tell you anything? Anything unusual?" Lily stared at the bracelet. Her eyes filled with uncertainty. Then she leaned closer and whispered words that made Ethan's pulse quicken. "Grandma said she found something hidden. She told me if anything happened, I should never tell Derek where she put it." For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. The sounds of the diner seemed distant now, muted beneath the weight of Lily's whispered confession. Rain continued sliding down the windows while Derek sat across the room pretending to scroll through his phone, but Ethan could feel the man watching them. Lily lowered her eyes to the bracelet again. "Grandma told me not to tell anybody," she said quietly. "She said some secrets can keep people safe." Ethan studied the child's face. She looked exhausted, like someone who had spent far too long carrying worries that no 8-year-old should have to carry. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to," he said gently. "But if your grandmother was trying to protect you, then maybe understanding what she found can help us understand what happened." Lily glanced toward Derek. He did not like it when Grandma asked questions. Ethan felt his pulse slow into the calm focus he had learned years ago. Questions. Missing person. Hidden object. None of it sounded like coincidence anymore. The waitress approached their booth with a fresh refill for Ethan. She placed the mug down and quietly slipped a folded newspaper beside it. Ethan recognized her immediately. Maggie owned the diner and had lived in the county for more than 30 years. Without saying a word, she tapped the newspaper once and walked away. Ethan unfolded it. On the front page was an old article. The headline discussed the disappearance of Martha Harper. The paper was nearly 7 months old. Someone had saved it. Someone wanted him to see it. Ethan scanned the article. According to authorities, Martha had left her house sometime during a Tuesday afternoon. Her vehicle remained parked in the driveway. Her purse had been found inside. Her neighbors reported nothing unusual. The case eventually grew cold. Ethan remembered reading those same details a month ago. At the time, it had sounded tragic. Now it sounded incomplete. What kind of thing did your grandmother find? Ethan asked. Lily shook her head. I do not know. Then she hesitated. But she was scared. Ethan waited. A week before she disappeared, she kept checking the windows. She locked all the doors. She stopped answering calls. Lily's voice grew smaller. One night, I heard her crying. Something flickered across Ethan's mind. Fear changes people. Real fear leaves patterns. Martha had clearly believed she was protecting someone. Maybe herself. Maybe Lily. Maybe both. Across the diner, Derek finally stood up and approached their table. His smile remained perfectly polite. I think it is time for us to go, he said. Lily has had a long morning. Lily immediately tensed. Ethan noticed. So did several customers nearby. Derek extended his hand toward the girl. Come on, kiddo. Lily did not move. An uncomfortable silence settled over the booth. Ethan slowly reached for his wallet. Before she leaves, he said casually, I have a question. Derek's expression remained pleasant. Sure. Did you know Martha Harper? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. For the first time, Derek's smile faltered. Only for a second. Most people would never have noticed. Ethan did. Of course, Derek answered. She was family. Must have been difficult when she disappeared. Derek nodded. Terrible. Did the police ever figure out where she went? Derek's jaw tightened slightly. No, Ethan held his gaze. Funny thing about missing people, he said calmly. Sometimes they disappear because they leave. Sometimes they disappear because they find something they were not supposed to find. The air between them grew noticeably colder. Derek stared at Ethan. Ethan stared back. Then Lily suddenly whispered 4 words that caused every instinct in Ethan's body to ignite. Grandma hid it underground. The words hung in the air long after Lily spoke them. Derek's expression remained calm, but Ethan noticed the subtle change in his eyes. It was gone almost instantly, hidden behind another practiced smile, yet it was enough. People only reacted that way when a truth landed closer to home than they expected. Derek cleared his throat. I think Lily has been watching too many mystery shows. He laughed softly, but nobody joined him. Ethan leaned back in the booth and casually lifted his coffee mug. Maybe. Derek nodded. Come on, Lily. Let's get going. The little girl looked down at her bracelet. I did not want to go home yet. A tense silence followed. Finally, Derek forced another smile. Then I will wait outside. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The bell above the door chimed as he disappeared into the rain. The moment the SUV pulled away from the front window, Ethan stood. Lily, do you trust me? The girl studied him carefully before giving a small nod. Good. Then I need you to tell me everything you remember. 30 minutes later, Ethan sat in his pickup truck parked behind the diner while rain drummed softly against the windshield. Lily sat beside him, holding a paper napkin covered in small pencil marks. She had drawn a rough map from memory. Grandma showed me once, she explained. She said if she ever forgot where it was, this would help. Ethan looked at the sketch. It showed an old farmhouse, a shed, and a large oak tree behind the property. An X had been drawn near the rear corner of the house. That is your grandmother's place? Lily nodded. Nobody lives there now. Ethan stared at the map. The farmhouse sat nearly 20 miles outside town, remote enough that nobody would bother it, old enough that secrets could stay hidden for years. He reached for his phone and made a call. Sam, he said when the line connected. I need a favor. 2 hours later, the rain finally began to ease. A gray sky, stretched over rolling Missouri farmland as Ethan's truck turned onto a narrow gravel road. Beside him sat Lily. Behind them rode Samuel, Iron Sam, Walker, and two other trusted members from the chapter. Nobody asked many questions. When Ethan mentioned Martha Harper's name, they agreed to help immediately. The farmhouse appeared around a bend in the road. Tom had not been kind to it. Paint peeled from the siding. Tall grass covered the yard. Several windows were boarded shut. Yet something about the place felt frozen rather than abandoned, as if the house had been waiting for someone to return. Lily stared quietly through the windshield. That is where Grandma lived. Ethan parked and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet earth and spring grass. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lily pointed toward the back of the property. The oak tree. They followed her across the yard. The massive tree stood behind the house exactly where the map showed. Ethan examined the ground nearby. Nothing seemed unusual until Iron Sam crouched beside the foundation. "Over here," he called. Beneath a patch of weeds sat a small section of wooden flooring that looked newer than everything around it. Ethan knelt and brushed away dirt. Hidden beneath the grass was a metal ring handle. Carefully he pulled. A narrow wooden panel lifted open. Everyone exchanged surprised looks. Beneath, it was a shallow storage space concealed below the house. Ethan reached inside and retrieved a weathered metal box. Lily's eyes widened. "That is it." The lock had already rusted away. Ethan slowly opened the lid. Inside rested several notebooks, a flash drive sealed inside a plastic bag, and a thick folder filled with documents. The top page carried Martha Harper's handwriting. Across the front, she had written 6 words that instantly changed everything. "If you're reading this, I was right." For several moments, nobody spoke. The wind rustled through the oak tree overhead, while Ethan stared at the message written across the folder. "If you're reading this, I was right." The words felt less like a note and more like a warning sent across time. Iron Sam carefully opened the folder while the others gathered around. Inside were property records, financial statements, handwritten notes, and copies of transactions spanning several years. Martha had documented everything with remarkable detail. Page after page revealed concerns about elderly homeowners being pressured into selling. Land far below market value. Several signatures appeared suspicious. Some names had been circled in red ink. Others had question marks written beside them. Ethan flipped through the material slowly. None of it looked accidental. Martha had been building a case. She was investigating something, Iron Sam said quietly. Ethan nodded, and she believed somebody would try to stop her. The flash drive worried him even more. People did not hide digital records beneath a farmhouse unless they feared losing them. As the afternoon sun began breaking through the clouds, Ethan carefully packed everything into a duffel bag. "We need to get Lily somewhere safe," he said, "until we understand what all of this means." Nobody argued. The chapter maintained a small lakeside property outside town that members occasionally used for fishing trips and weekend gatherings. It was private, secure, and rarely visited. By early evening, Lily sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch overlooking the water, while Ethan and Iron Sam reviewed the documents inside the cabin. The more they read, the stranger the situation became. Martha had connected dozens of real estate purchases to a network of shell companies. Several properties eventually transferred into accounts connected to one name that appeared repeatedly throughout her notes. Derek Vaughn. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "This is bigger than family problems." Iron Sam nodded grimly. "A lot bigger." As darkness settled over the lake, headlights suddenly appeared outside the cabin. Every person inside immediately looked toward the windows. Ethan stepped onto the porch. A pickup truck sat near the entrance gate. Nobody exited. The engine idled for nearly 30 seconds before the vehicle slowly turned around and disappeared back down the road. Ethan watched until the taillights vanished. Something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. He walked the perimeter of the property before returning inside. Lily looked up from the couch. "Is everything okay?" Ethan forced a reassuring smile. Everything is fine, but he did not fully believe it himself. Later that night, while the others slept, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table studying Martha's final notebook. The last pages were different from the rest. Her handwriting became rushed and uneven. One entry caught his attention immediately. They know I have the records. If anything happens, protect Lily. Ethan stared at the sentence for a long time. A knot formed in his chest. He had spent years convincing himself that helping people was someone else's responsibility. Yet somehow this little girl had walked into a diner and changed everything. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Reaper? Ethan looked up. Lily stood in the hallway, holding a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days. I cannot sleep. Ethan pulled out the chair beside him. Come sit. She climbed into the seat and looked at the scattered papers. Were you friends with Grandma? Ethan smiled faintly. No, I wish I had known her. Lily stared at the notebook. Do you think she was brave? Ethan glanced at the final entry. Protect Lily. Then he looked back at the child sitting beside him. I think she was one of the bravest people I have ever heard of. Lily smiled for the first time all day. A small, genuine smile. Then she asked a question Ethan never expected. If Grandma trusted you to help me, does that mean I can trust you too, Mr. Reaper? The question lingered in the quiet cabin long after Lily asked it. Ethan looked at the little girl sitting beside him and felt something shift inside him. For years, he had kept people at a distance. It was easier that way. Simpler. But there was nothing simple about the trust in Lily's eyes. Yes, he said softly. You can trust me. Lily nodded, as if that answer settled something important inside her. A few minutes later, she returned to bed, leaving Ethan alone with Martha's notebook and a growing sense that time was running out. The next morning arrived gray and cool. Mist drifted across the lake while sunlight struggled through low clouds. Ethan stepped outside with a cup of coffee and found Iron Sam already waiting on the porch. The older man looked serious. We have a problem, he said. Ethan listened as Sam explained. During the night, 2 different chapter members had reported unfamiliar vehicles near properties connected to the club. Nobody had approached. Nobody had made threats. But somebody was clearly paying attention. Ethan glanced toward the cabin window where Lily was eating breakfast inside. They know we found something. Sam nodded. Looks that way. By noon, several trusted members arrived at the property. They gathered around a long wooden table overlooking the water while Ethan spread Martha's documents across the surface. The atmosphere felt different from a normal chapter meeting. There were no discussions about motorcycles or weekend rides. Every man there understood the situation. A little girl was scared. An elderly woman had vanished. And now evidence suggested something much larger had been hidden beneath the surface of their community for years. Ethan explained everything from the diner to the farmhouse. Nobody interrupted. When he finished, silence settled across the table. Finally, one writer named Cooper leaned back in his chair. So what exactly are we doing? Ethan looked around the group. Nothing is mandatory. Several heads nodded. Nobody owes me anything. Nobody owes this situation anything. But Lily deserves protection until we know the truth. Another writer spoke up. That kid does not have anybody else, does she? Ethan shook his head. Not right now. The answer seemed to hit harder than anything else. Men who had spent decades building tough reputations suddenly looked away toward the lake. One by one, they began speaking. I can help watch the property. I know somebody who can analyze the flash drive. My cousin works with county records. I can handle transportation if Lily needs somewhere safer. Ethan listened quietly. Nobody was being ordered. Nobody was being pressured. They were volunteering because they wanted to. Finally, Iron Sam stood. The 70-year-old chapter president rested both hands on the table and looked at every writer present. We have spent years talking about brotherhood, he said. Maybe today it means something more. He pointed toward the cabin. If that little girl is under our protection, then she is family. A murmur of agreement spread through the group. Then came the sound that would stay with Ethan forever. One after another, every writer stood up. No speeches. No dramatic gestures. Just quiet commitment. Men choosing to help because it was the right thing to do. Late that afternoon, Lily stepped onto the porch carrying her stuffed rabbit. She stopped when she saw nearly 24 motorcycles parked along the gravel road. Chrome gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. Leather vests carried patches from riders of different ages and backgrounds. Some were veterans. Some owned businesses. Some had spent years rebuilding their lives. Yet all of them smiled when they saw her. Lily looked up at Ethan. Are all those people here because of me? Ethan followed her gaze. For a moment he did not answer. Then he smiled. No, Geed. Lily looked confused. Ethan rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. They are here because nobody should have to face something scary alone. As the motorcycles lined the road beside the lake and the chapter quietly organized their next steps, none of them realized that hidden inside Martha's flash drive was a piece of information that would soon change everything they thought they knew about Derek Vaughn. The following morning began with a sense of anticipation that nobody could quite explain. The lake remained calm, reflecting a pale blue sky as sunlight filtered through the trees surrounding the cabin. Inside, Ethan sat beside a laptop while a chapter member named Ryan carefully examined the contents of Martha's flash drive. For nearly an hour, folders opened one after another. Property records, financial spreadsheets, scanned contracts, photographs of documents. Everything Martha had collected appeared organized with remarkable precision. She had clearly expected someone else to continue her work if she could not. Ethan watched silently as Ryan opened another folder labeled Final Evidence. You should see this, Ryan said quietly. The room immediately grew still. Several writers moved closer. Inside the folder were dozens of records connecting multiple shell companies to land acquisitions throughout 3 counties. Properties purchased from elderly owners eventually transferred through a chain of businesses before ending up under a larger investment group. At first glance, the transactions appeared legal, but Martha had highlighted irregularities everywhere. Signatures that did not match previous records. Sale prices dramatically below market value. Missing disclosures. Missing witnesses. Missing paperwork. Ethan leaned forward. Can all of this be verified? Ryan nodded. Most of it already can. He clicked another file. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. Names filled hundreds of rows. One name appeared more often than any other. Derek Vaughn. The room fell silent again. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Martha had not been investigating a family dispute. She had uncovered a pattern. A very profitable pattern. Elderly homeowners were losing valuable land while somebody quietly benefited. Then Ryan opened the final document. It contained a personal letter written by Martha only 3 days before her disappearance. Ethan recognized her handwriting immediately. If anything happens to me, please understand that I never stopped searching for the truth. Lily deserves a future free from fear. She deserves to know that good people still exist. If you're reading this, do not stop asking questions. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even the toughest writers around the table seemed affected by the words. Martha's concern had never been about money. It had always been about protecting her granddaughter. Ethan looked toward the window where Lily sat on the porch drawing pictures in a notebook. She looked peaceful for the first time since entering the diner. There is more, Ryan said. He clicked one final attachment hidden inside the folder. A scanned document appeared. The date immediately caught Ethan's attention. It was from 7 months earlier, the same week Martha disappeared. Ryan read quietly. Private investigator report. Ethan exchanged a glance with Iron Sam. Neither had known Martha, hired an investigator. Ryan continued scrolling. The report detailed meetings, property transfers, and business connections. Then he stopped abruptly. You are not going to believe this. Ethan stepped closer. Near the bottom of the report was a section titled Subject Associations. Beneath Derek Vaughn's name appeared several business contacts and financial partners. One photograph accompanied the entry. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. The man standing beside Derek was somebody he recognized instantly. Not because of Martha's records. Not because of the missing person investigation. Because the man currently served on the county development board and regularly appeared in local newspapers promoting community projects. Suddenly, everything became much larger than one missing woman. Much larger than one frightened child. Martha had uncovered connections reaching into places nobody expected. Iron Sam slowly exhaled. Now I understand why she was scared. Ethan nodded. Through the cabin window, he watched Lily laugh softly at something she had drawn on the page. The innocence of that moment contrasted sharply with the information sitting on the table behind him. Then Ryan opened the final image stored on the flash drive. The photograph showed Martha standing beside her oak tree only days before she vanished. She was smiling, but Ethan's attention focused on something else. Hanging around her neck was a silver key he had never seen before. The discovery of the silver key changed the direction of everything. Ethan printed the photograph and placed it beside Martha's notebook while the chapter continued reviewing the evidence. Nobody could identify the key, but one detail stood out immediately. Martha never wore jewelry. According to Lily, her grandmother rarely wore anything except her wedding band and the bracelet she had given away years earlier. If Martha had chosen to wear that key around her neck, it mattered. The next morning, Ethan drove into town with Iron Sam and delivered copies of every document, photograph, and financial record to federal investigators who specialized in fraud cases. They did not make accusations. They simply handed over evidence. The response was immediate. Within hours, investigators began verifying transactions connected to the properties Martha had documented. Several records raised serious questions. Others revealed discrepancies that could no longer be ignored. By late afternoon, rumors spread throughout the county. Reporters started calling offices. Officials scheduled meetings. People who had never paid attention to Martha Harper's disappearance suddenly wanted answers. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on Lily. The little girl spent the day at the lakeside property drawing pictures and feeding ducks along the shoreline. For the first time since he met her, she laughed freely. Every time Ethan heard that laugh, he became more determined to see the truth uncovered. Near sunset, a breakthrough arrived. Ryan called from town. "We found the key." Ethan immediately put him on speaker. Several writers gathered around. "An old safe deposit box," Ryan explained. "Martha rented it nearly 10 years ago." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. What was inside? The bank released the contents to investigators this afternoon after reviewing the documents. There were letters, additional records, and a sealed statement signed by Martha. Silence filled the room. "What did it say?" Ethan asked. Ryan hesitated. "According to the investigator I spoke with, Martha believed Derek Vaughn was involved in a coordinated scheme targeting vulnerable property owners. But that was not the biggest revelation." Ethan exchanged a glance with Iron Sam. "Then what was—" Ryan exhaled slowly. "Martha wrote that she feared she might disappear before finishing her investigation. She specifically requested that if anything happened to her, authorities should immediately review Derek Vaughn's financial history and reopen her missing person case." The room became completely silent. Outside, the sky glowed orange over the lake. Ethan looked through the window toward Lily. She sat on the dock, swinging her feet above the water while her stuffed rabbit rested beside her. A child enjoying a peaceful evening. A child who had spent months carrying fear alone. The contrast hit him harder than expected. Hours later, news finally arrived. Federal investigators had formally opened a major inquiry based on the evidence Martha collected. Several financial accounts connected to the property transfers were frozen pending review. More importantly, authorities officially reopened Martha Harper's disappearance case. Ethan stepped onto the porch and watched darkness settle across the lake. Behind him, motorcycles lined the gravel road. Ahead of him, the dock lights reflected softly across the water. Then he heard footsteps. Lily joined him, carrying her rabbit. "Mr. Reaper?" she asked. "Yes, kid." She looked up at him with calm eyes. "Do you think Grandma knows people are finally listening?" Ethan stared at the stars beginning to appear overhead. "I think she will be very proud of you." Lily smiled and slipped her small hand into his. For the first time, there was no fear in her expression. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just trust. And as Ethan looked across the quiet lake, he realized something remarkable. The frightened little girl who had walked into a diner asking for protection was no longer standing alone. An entire town was finally paying attention, and the truth Martha had fought so hard to preserve was beginning to come into the light. 6 months later, the town looked different. Maybe the streets had not changed. Maybe the buildings were exactly the same. But people carried themselves differently. Conversations that once ended with shrugs now ended with answers. Questions that had lingered for years had finally been addressed. The investigation sparked by Martha Harper's records continued to move forward, uncovering information that authorities had overlooked for far too long. Property owners received long overdue attention. Families found closure where uncertainty had once lived. And throughout it all, one little girl slowly rebuilt her life. On a warm Saturday afternoon in early autumn, colorful balloons swayed gently outside the chapter clubhouse near the lake. Long picnic tables filled the yard. Children ran across the grass. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air. More than 100 riders had traveled from neighboring counties to attend a very special celebration. Today was Lily Harper's 9th birthday. Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd, watching the festivities unfold. The little girl who had once walked into a diner, soaked by rain and trembling with fear, now raced across the lawn, laughing with friends her own age. Her blonde hair bounced behind her as she ran. Her smile appeared effortlessly now. It was the kind of smile every child deserved. Near the clubhouse entrance stood a married couple from the chapter, Robert and Linda Hayes. They were both in their 60s. They had spent decades helping foster children throughout the region and had quietly opened their home to Lily during the months following the investigation. What began as temporary care gradually became something much deeper. Several weeks earlier, the adoption had been finalized. For the first time in a very long time, Lily had a permanent home, a real family, a place where she never had to wonder whether she was safe. As the afternoon continued, guests gathered near a large birthday cake decorated with blue frosting and tiny motorcycle designs. Everyone sang while Lily beamed from ear to ear. Then she noticed something sitting beside the cake, a framed photograph. Martha Harper smiled back from the picture. Fresh flowers rested beside the frame. The sight made Lily pause. She walked over quietly and touched the edge of the photograph. For a moment, emotion flickered across her face. Then she smiled softly. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she whispered. Ethan heard her. So did several others nearby. Nobody spoke. Some moments deserved silence. Later, as the sun began lowering toward the horizon, Lily found Ethan standing beside the lake. The water reflected gold and orange light, while motorcycles lined the distant road. She walked over carrying a small wrapped gift. "This is for you," she said. Ethan looked surprised. "For me?" Lily nodded. He carefully opened the package. Inside was a simple drawing framed in wood. The picture showed a diner, a little girl, and a biker sitting together in a booth. Above them she had written 3 words in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Reaper." Ethan stared at the drawing longer than he expected. "I love it," he said quietly. Lily smiled. Then she looked out across the lake. "You saved me." Ethan remained silent for a moment. The breeze carried the distant sound of laughter from the party. Finally, he shook his head. "No, Guide." Lily looked confused. Ethan gestured toward the clubhouse, the riders, the families, and the life she had built around her. "You saved all of us." Tears filled Lily's eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude, belonging, and hope. As evening settled over the lake, everyone gathered together for one final photograph. More than 100 riders stood side by side. Families filled the spaces between them. At the center stood Lily, smiling brighter than anyone else. And for the first time since Martha Harper disappeared, the story ended not with questions, but with something far more powerful. A child who found a family, a community that chose compassion, and a promise that no one would ever have to face the darkness alone again.